Yep, that's fresh crop. What is fresh crop? Why should we care? Let's get into it. What's up, fellow fans, coffee lovers everywhere? My name is Haley. I am your brew guide usually, but today I am your fresh crop coffee guide and local resident Q grader, here to talk to you about what fresh crop coffee is, why should you care about fresh crop, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our fresh crop Colombia feature that we are doing in March. So let's get into it. First off, what is fresh crop coffee and why should you care about it? Coffee, like other things that occur naturally, like organic materials, right, is seasonal. I want you to picture, if you will, you are going to the farmer's market and you're going to buy a delicious tomato. And you really want this delicious heirloom tomato that is in season. Why do you want a delicious heirloom tomato that is in season? Why can't you just go to a farmer's market in the winter and expect to get a delicious heirloom tomato versus that nice ripe summer heirloom tomato? The summer heirloom tomato is in season, so it's gonna be at the peak of its flavor, at the peak of its freshness, right? At the peak of its flavor complexity. It's just gonna taste so good when it's in season. Coffee has seasons too. It's totally seasonal. Different growing regions around the world have different seasons. Colombia, which we're talking about today, has the special distinction of being sort of harvested all year round, like coffee being harvested kind of year round because of its geographical location. Colombia is located right at the top tip of South America, and it's sort of on the Pacific side and also on the Atlantic side. So it's got more or less two rainy seasons, right? More on that later. So how long is coffee fresh post-harvest? That's hard to quantify. There's no like set amount of months or days or weeks that coffee goes from fresh to not fresh, right? Like there's no switch that's flipped where it's like coffee's fresh for this long and then all of a sudden not fresh anymore. It's considered fresh as long as another harvest hasn't occurred in that same area. Also, freshness can really be tasted, right? Like coffee that has been stored for long periods of time outside of a freezer, just in the grain pro bags or burlap sacks that coffee typically comes in. It can get papery, it can get less complex, it can get even musty or what we call baggy, which I quantify by, if you've ever thought about biting a burlap sack. But age can be tasted is my point, right? Like there's just a lack of complexity, a lack of brightness. Much like that winter tomato, it'll still be a tomato. It'll still taste like a tomato, but it's not gonna be vibrant and expressive like that summer tomato will be. Let's talk about coffee storage. The first thing that you wanna do, ideally, is get through your green coffee that you bought by roasting it and selling it, right? As close to off of harvest as you can. Roasteries, they'll typically store inside of a large plastic bag. I called it a Grain Pro bag earlier by habit, going back to my roastery days. And then those will usually be in a big burlap bag. Sometimes green coffee just comes in a burlap bag, like giant, really large 150-pound bags. It's a lot of coffee. If they don't get through it quickly enough, right, like roasting and selling it, the next thing a lot of roasters will do is store the coffee sealed in a special freezer, right? Just big freezer devoted only to green coffee. If you store it with other items, like other food items, or if you store it not sealed, you run the risk of other flavors coming into and getting sealed into the green coffee. Much like things, imagine putting stuff in your freezer, right? If something's not sealed properly, it can impart its flavor on everything else that is in the freezer and not sealed, right? So roasters avoid having coffee go past crop by either roasting and selling it super quickly or storing it in freezers as green coffee. Let's get into harvest seasons in Colombia specifically. So as I said earlier, it has the special distinction of having harvests kind of all year round. Colombia being situated where it is on the north tip of South America and being on both the Pacific and the Atlantic Oceans has 2 dry and 2 wet seasons per year. So again, harvests all year round. One of the arrival times to the US is in that January, February, March range, which is why we are featuring these coffees in March. All 6 coffees arrived to us shortly before we started our feature. So you're really getting some fresh crop. Let's go through a brief history of Colombia coffee, right? And Colombia coffee processing. So Colombia has about a 300-year history with coffee, coffee first arrived in the late 18th century in Colombia and has been growing ever since. Legend has it that coffee started to spread in Colombia because of a priest in the Department of Santander, Colombia, charging his congregation to do penance by planting coffee seeds. And so legend has it that that really started cultivation, and it's grown ever since. In 1927, the National Federation of Coffee Growers, or FNC, Federación Nacional de Cafeteros, was established in Colombia to advocate for coffee growers' rights. In 1982, Variedad Colombia, or the Colombia coffee variety, is created by crossing the female parent Caturra with the male parent Timor to get this variety called Caturra. And this created a really rust or roya resistant coffee, right? So it was resistant to a disease that could take out a bunch of coffee plants. And Caturra is really credited with saving a lot of coffee production in Colombia at the time. And Sene Cafe continued to develop varieties by crossing other varieties together to create these varieties to resist rust and disease and drought and just generally be higher production as well, but also maintain quality. Colombia historically has had a lot of wash processed coffees, but nowadays, especially ever since the turn of the 21st century, Colombia has been really, really heavily helping to lead experimental coffee processing, and they've really just taken strides in experimental coffee processing, so keep a lookout for new processing methods coming out of Colombia. Thanks so much for joining me today on this fresh crop journey, and we hope that you love fresh crop Colombia and love fresh crop coffee. Cheers.